Class. Welcome to week two of City Life. This week we complete reading George Zimmel's Metropolis and Mental Life. I think one of the most brilliant essays written in sociology, maybe even beyond sociology as well, that really talks about the mental life of urban and rural dwellers. And there's some really intriguing and fascinating concepts explored throughout, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. Then you have a two-part discussion board. As you well know, look at the syllabus and my video introduction to the due dates. Reply post due Thursday. Original post due Thursday, reply post due Friday. It's all in the syllabus. And so make sure that you just pay attention to the instructions that have been provided to you in my introduction video and the syllabus. But so far, everything seems pretty good without a hitch. And so well done with that. Um, and so the first discussion board asks you to talk about some of the most positive and negative aspects of city life, from the political to the social to the cultural to the economic. And so uh, that first part of the discussion board asks you to talk about the positive and negative characteristics of city life, the whole idea of identity formation and struggle. It's certainly in the city where people figure out who they are, what's their identity, what's their place in the world, what's their personality like, things of that nature. And so that's what happens in the city, where you're exposed to this mosaic of cultures in a true cosmopolitan canopy. Obviously, you don't see those things in small towns like La Crosse, but in certainly the urban metropolis like Beijing and Shanghai and San Francisco and New York, Lisbon, Madrid, places like that. You'll see this mosaic of cultures, the entire world, in these vast urban metropolises, and it's a place where people struggle, they resist. And they also spread their wings in ways they probably could have never have imagined before. And all that can only really happen in the city. And so I ask you to talk about these positive, negative aspects of the city, this idea of identity formation and struggle, the idea of creativity and risk. Um, and so, and to talk about, these global forces and local realities, as, the whole world has descended on these cities in this process of globalization and immigration, all coupled with these economic shifts has vastly changed the urban metropolis. If you go back to rural times, you're pretty the place where you were born is pretty much where you stayed for the rest of your life. Everyone knew who you were. Your identity was solid. Your identity was fixed. There is very little you could do to change it. You're exposed to the same exact people every single day from birth to death, and you're never exposed to any other worldviews, any other ideas. You had a very strong collective consciousness. You had a very strong, like I said, and fixed identity. And really, because of some of the great structural transformations that occurred in the advent of modernity, in particular with the Industrial Revolution, there was massive economic shifts that radically changed the populations of the United States and demography of the world and the demography of the planet. And so now, for the first time, people today living in urban cities are exposed to people from all over the world. Every possible imaginable skin color, every possible imaginable tradition, every possible imaginable language and religion and worldviews. This has never really happened before. And so it's had profound effects on the cosmopolitan urban dweller. And so I ask you to consider some of those things. And of course, these cities, while they have endless possibilities for us to spread our wings to become everything that we are, these cities are also laden with structural, social, and economic inequalities that has created zones of apartheid, zones of exclusion, even right here in the United States, especially with this process of gentrification that we have, and of course, wealth being concentrated in the hands of the few. So we have to ask ourselves, who controls the cities? Who owns the cities? Who has the right to the city? And today, if you go to places like New York, the only people with a real right to the city are the multi-billionaires. If you're not a multi-billionaire, you're rather poor when you live in places like New York City. And so, who does the city belong to? And of course, today, with rising economic inequality, where all wealth and power has been concentrated in the hands of a small, tiny cabal of human beings that live their lives in our global cities, we have to ask ourselves, who has the right to the city now? Um, in part two of the discussion board, we talk about George Zimmel's Metropolis and Mental Life. Which explores the intricate relationship between urban environments and psychological experiences of people. Zimmel viewed the vast metropolis as one of the defining characteristics of modernity. In fact, a lot of the classical theorists and sociologists viewed that as well. Marx viewed the greatest problem of modern life is alienation rooted in false consciousness, as opposed to someone like Weber, who viewed the central problem of modern life as rationality trapping us in an iron cage that we ourselves can't get out of. And of course, Durkheim, his central problem of modern life was anomie rooted in social transformation. And so here, Zimmel talks about the central problem of modern life, of as human beings being having their subjectivity cannibalized by an objective culture of mass production. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So in the Metropolis, Zimmel makes the argument that massive objective culture transforms humans into this cog in a machine, where people in such a world become a simulation of a simulation. Basically, we just become copies. We're all mass-produced hamburgers. Um, and so in that discussion board, I ask you to hit on some of those central themes that Zimmel discusses within this mosaic of cultures, this blasé attitude, and the unique psychological dynamics that emerge in a city. So I ask you to talk about urban and rural consciousness, this idea of the mosaic of cultures, the blasé attitude, and the psychological conditions of the city. And I also list some key concepts there in that discussion board. And really, he talks about that the deepest problem of modern life in that very opening paragraph of the Metropolis and Mental Life, where he says, the deepest problems of modern life flow from the attempt of the individual to maintain the independence and individuality of his existence against the sovereign powers of society, against the weight of historical heritage and the external culture and technique of life. Beautiful sentence. And so, as human beings, at least the way I interpret it, as human beings, we have this subjectivity that you can kind of refer to as our essence, our soul, our being. And our task as human beings is to take our subjectivity and through interaction, through engaging in activity, we take our subjective being and we externalize it into an objective reality. And in this way, we become who we are. We exert our independence. We exert our subjectivity. We exert our souls. We spread our wings and become everything that we can possibly become. The only problem in modern life, in our late stage era of late capitalism, defined as mass production, the more that we try to exert our individuality, mainly through consumption, the consumption of fashion, the consumption of identities, uh, we end up becoming just as mass produced as the hamburgers that we eat. So, how can you assert then a sense of individuality, a sense of self, something unique about you or your essence when you're constantly trying to express that individuality through consuming mass produced commodities mass-produced images, mass-produced identities. When you try to assert your individuality through participating in a mass-produced world, you become mass-produced. You become just like that hamburger. It's like how our educational system is set up. It produces humans the same way that McDonald's produces hamburgers. You go through the motions, you follow the rubrics, you follow the standardization, you follow the structure, and by the time you get out of school, you have no individuality. You're as mass produced as everyone. You're this one-dimensional being that thinks in terms of completing rubrics and standardized exams, or you lose your essence, you lose your sense of self. Well, let's say you live in the urban city and you want to stand out. You want to show that you are a unique individual. Well, what are you going to do? Right? Have take a get a mass-produced tattoo like everybody else, paint your hair purple like everybody else, consume fashion like everybody else, pick an identity that already existed before your birth and assert that that's your individuality and your uniqueness. In other words, everything that you can try to become already exists before your birth. Everything that you're trying to become to exert your individuality and your essence is just picking from a mosaic of styles and commodities and identities that have already existed before you. And so you just internalizing the objective world into your consciousness. And when you internalize the objective world into your consciousness and that becomes you, you lose yourself. You are no longer you. You're just this objective, mass-produced commodity with no sense of self and with no individuality. And that's what Zimmel argues, that this objective culture has cannibalized our subjectivity and rendered us nothing more than mass-produced commodities with no thoughts, no ideas, no beliefs, and no consciousness of our own. We are completely mass-produced, objective beings simply reproducing this objective world, and we have lost and denied ourselves of any form of individuality or any form of consciousness. And so, and Zimmel didn't think there was a particular way out of this as well. And so, this is the deepest problem of modern life, at least from what I get out of this reading. He also talks about this blasé attitude that people like New Yorkers or those from Berlin kind of get. And I know I lived in New York City for a long time. New York City is one of my homes. I went to graduate school in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. I was a high school teacher in Chelsea district of Manhattan. Uh, I worked as a teacher in Brooklyn, including worked in juvenile jails in Brooklyn. I have family that lives in New York. New York is one of my homes, and so I remember, living in New York, and you know, you have all of this external stimuli just constantly saturating you, where you just see, violence all over the place, traffic, all the lights, you see muggings, robberies. I can't tell you how many dead bodies I've seen, even in the city, outside of the city too, but I've seen a lot of violence. I've seen a lot of death. I've had a lot of students that have killed from murder. Um, you get oversaturated with so much external stimuli that it has profound psychological implications on the urban dweller. And one of the ways that we protect ourselves from this constant onslaught of external stimuli that saturates us living in the city, we kind of developed this inner self-protective organism that kind of blocks off all of that external stimuli to kind of protect us from all that external stimuli. If we as urban dwellers were constantly responding to all of this external stimuli, we couldn't live our lives. We'd be constantly responding from all this overstimulation. And so this kind of natural protective um, internal organ kind of develops within us where we are able to block out all of that saturation. And it kind of makes us seem like we're indifferent. It kind of gives us this kind of blasé kind of attitude, and it comes off as a little bit of rude or a little bit of matter of factness, this kind of matter of fact attitude. And I remember, living in New York, and I was going to work one day, going out to Manhattan and walking from Brooklyn. and I see a person get hit by a car. And it was gruesome. It was a very gruesome uh, accident where the person was mangled and dying on the street. The blood was everywhere. People were, you know, panicking. And I remember just walking past, and I didn't really give it much thought. I had seen one of the most gruesome and violent deaths that I'd ever seen in my life, even to this day. And I had no response. I just went to work. And it wasn't later that I thought about it and I wonder what kind of person have I become? I can see this type of violence, this type of death, and it doesn't even faze me. And then I remember going back, having read Zimmel and his concept of this blasé attitude, and I remember this is that exact protective organism that he was talking about, that I've been able to somehow block off this external stimuli so I can just go about my life. If this happened in a rural setting, it'd be talked about for years, probably. It would have profound psychological trauma on a rural dweller. They would remember that forever. For me, water off a duck's back. And that's one of the psychological impacts of living in the city, for better or worse. Another very important concept that Zimmel talks about is how modern life has rendered everything into a quantitative interaction. As a matter of fact, one of the things that capitalism has done, as defined with one of the central characteristics of capitalism, which is the urban metropolis, um, is that people have um, not only developed this kind of external protective mechanism, but something else has also changed profoundly. All relationships, all things that were qualitative in life, rich, with meaning, has turned into something overly rational, where all human interactions are reduced to something basically transactional based upon a money economy, whether it be love, trust, beauty, all of our relationships become reduced to this quantitative, overly rationalistic value. And so, what has this type of transactional society that all of us live in? We all live in this transactional based society, unless you live way out in the outback, or if you live way out in the Amazon, we live in this transactional society. And one of the things that this has done to human beings, you hear a lot about diversity um, in the world. If you're in a university, diversity is something that's always discussed and always mentioned. But if you travel around the world enough, you'll notice that pretty much regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, language, culture, it doesn't really matter. There isn't much diversity on the planet unless you get out of the extension of capitalism, unless you get out of modern civilization, like I said, into the outback in Australia, or to, the bush people, maybe in parts of Africa, or maybe the Amazon. Pretty much everyone is the same. And that's one of the things that Zimmel also discusses. And when everybody becomes the same, it's because everyone thinks the same according to this transactional based society, where all things of quality are reduced to a calculable, controllable, efficient, and measurable uh, outcome, everything. And so when I see, for example, a cashier, I don't see a complete human being. I don't see a complete complex human being with thoughts, emotions, beliefs, joys, triumphs. I don't see the complete human being. What I see is someone who just serves a role. I present this item, I give you money, you give me receipt, we walk away. That's the only reason why you exist. When a student sees a professor, they don't see the complete human being, complex human being that's lived a life, that's experienced love and tragedy and beauty and all the complexity of the human being, it just becomes a person who exists to perform a specific function, to administer a specific grade, that was paid for with a certain amount of money, right? And so everything in social life gets reduced to something that's calculable, controllable, and efficient, and based upon a money economy, based upon in other words, everything gets reduced to a simple transaction that's based on money. And that becomes what we are as human beings. And can you imagine that that's the end? As human beings, we're nothing but these kind of quantifiable commodities engaging in a transactional behavior and valuing the worth of our existence through simple money, through a simple quantitative value. And so Zimmel says that this is what's destroyed human civilization. This is the greatest tragedy of modern life. And there are no easy solutions to this. So anyway, those are some of my. Oh, and the last thing I would say is that, um, you know, the city also in the city emerges eccentric personalities, um, where if you go to places like New York, you're going to see all kinds of things that shock you. You're going to see all these eccentric, bigger than life kinds of people. They're called eccentric, but that's kind of what in this sea of objectivity, in this sea of sameness. Because let's face it, the modern life, when everything gets reduced to a rational outcome, when everything is based on a transactional economy, everything gets reduced to sameness. Everyone becomes the same. And so you have people in this mass of sameness, in this mass homogeneous objective culture, trying to assert some type of independence from the sea of objectivity to distinguish themselves from the rest of the people, from the rest of the homogenous masses. And so this tends to produce eccentric personalities in the city. And so if you go to places like New York or Paris or Berlin, you're going to see some very interesting characters who kind of stick out above the ordinary. Of course, when these eccentric characters, they go into the rural areas, or they even go into small towns like across, they're viewed as crazy, and they may not be received very well. But nonetheless, that's something that you'll see when you go into the city. So next time you're hanging out in a major city around the world or in the United States, check out some of those kinds of characters and personalities, and think about Zimmel, because that'll remind you of some of the brilliance of, I think, of this essay. So I hope you enjoy it, and I very much look forward to the discussion boards. And as always, I'll give you my comments and feedback. And also, as always, feel free to email me for anything at all. Keep going strong. It's been a great class, and y'all are doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Thank you.